What's up, future shredlords? Welcome back. Death to the Fingers. I got asked on the Twitters if I could come up with a custom practice session with respect to triads, that sort of expands the range of the old tried and true and starts to factor in some new ideas using the diatonic scale, using sort of what I call pleasant dissonance. How you can start to use these basic triads as a very powerful tool as far as your harmonic improvisations go, when you're practicing over chords and whatnot. So we're going to go over the broad strokes, of course, for each of the sections, and just see if you can't start to emulate some of these basic ideas, like using a scale and starting to layer the chords, the appropriate triad, if you will, over top of the appropriate position of the scale, diatonically speaking. And then, of course, sort of matching up sounds, when you have dominant 7 getting into the more dominant 7 type flavors. But as a triad, I know you can do that. Yeah, you can. So it's something that we have to practice. And there's other applications too, whether they be more as the arpeggio type teaching platform, where we're training our ear to develop the sixth sense, if you will, so we can anticipate notes. You're like, okay, if I move down this whole step, I get this sound. If I move down a minor third, I'm going to get this sound, so on and so forth. And of course, last but not least, you're also starting to mix and match the ideas as far as the technique is concerned. So we're getting the physical workout we want on the fretboard as well. So it's the whole 9 yards. It's mental, it's sort of fretboard knowledge, and then it's the physical aspect of being able to play it. So triads are no joke. They're one of the 4 pillars. You have the minor pentatonic scale, the major modes, triads, and then dominant 7s. That's just chords with 4 notes in them. Those are the 4 biggies. You have to know those ones if you want to sort of get anywhere with guitar. You may not have to be the master of all that stuff, but you have to have a solid understanding of what that means and how to use it. And just using it sparingly, trust me, makes a huge difference. So enough of the chit-chatting. Let's get into the first part of this lesson. All right, this first section here, essentially you saw it was me moving around the top 3 strings using the cage system. I was using D-type chords, I was using E-type chords and A-type chords from that cage system to play the chords of G major, right, which were G major, A minor, B minor, C major, D major or D7, E minor, F diminished, F sharp diminished, I should say, and then of course back to G major again. And now I'm just starting to group them together in terms of how those chords are played with respect to the caged type chords. So when I'm playing them as D-type chords, I start moving downwards, right? There's the 1 chord, I move down to the 7 chord, that's going to be diminished, but as a D-type chord. And then down to a minor, that's also a D-type chord. And then I jump up to the E ones and I go through all the major and minor diminished versions of that, climbing up. And then, of course, yes, I come back down again using the A types. So I think you're getting the message here. You got to move around the diatonic scale using those positions to dictate the tonality of these triads and get very good at just being like, I'm on the 5th degree, play dominant 7 or major. Right, based around whichever string it is. And listen, it starts getting more complex when you start to factor in spread triads and stuff like that, or even sympathetic chords. So this is just the very tip of the iceberg. But start with that is this idea that you're going to start to move around using the chord families to play diatonically on each set of strings. Now, listen, I did the top three, and you're going to move it to the next set and the next set and the next set until you run out of strings. So there is no stopping. And of course, you're going to start to arrange them in different sequences, not just up and down like that. You're going to start to move up and down the fretboard this way on a diagonal, both forwards and backwards, and up and down. Then you can get crazier after that. Right, let's move on to the next section. All right, in that exercise, you see me using A minor, effectively using the cadence system. And since I'm like, oh, look, A minor, that's the second degree of G major. That's the Dorian position. I can factor in this extension note, which is going to be the 9. So now I'm basically playing A minor 9. And I start using that in conjunction with the cadence system. So I do A minor 9 in the C-type position to start with. And then, of course, I do just A minor 7 in the open position. And then I do another sort of variant of A minor from the G-type chord at the 5th fret there. And then you see me do the E-type chord with the minor 9. So the idea here is that you can move not only just the triad itself around as the chord, but start to add in these more exotic flavors like the 9, the 11, and the 13, but mostly the 9 for both major and minor. And just take your playing to the next level. You'd be surprised at how important that note can be for transitioning to another chord or something like that. So it's really important to practice that. And of course, moving around the fretboard using the same type of chord, constraining yourself to be like, just do a bunch of A minors based around the A-type chord, based around the C-type chord, based around the D-type chord, based around the G and the E-type chord, right? So you can quickly start to move around the fretboard using those basic principles, and then start to layer in the inversions, and all of a sudden you're cooking with gas. So I think that's all that needs to be said. Start to arrange your sessions where you just take one chord and use all 4 of the chords, meaning major, minor, diminished, and dominant 7, and do this exercise where you start to move it around. Use vamps on the internet. Right, now I'm done. Let's get into the next one. All right, section 3 demonstrates the idea of beautiful dissonance, but also the principle of a perfect cadence being used in contrast with the underlying harmonic stuff, right? So you're playing B minor as the underlying chord. So B is either the 3rd degree of G major or the 6th degree of D major. So I was like, why not use A major, the 5 of D major as the chord that I'm going to bounce to, right? Instead of A minor, I'm doing A major. So A major to D major. And that creates this beautiful dissonance. And of course, it gives me another tool to work with, right? You can be like, okay, D major is the 5 of G major, the key I'm working in. So I'm seeing a chain of 5s going on there. So the circle of 5ths, maybe? Right. you're starting to slowly get the idea here that you can use that information not just for moving the arpeggios around and whatnot, but also layering them together. It's kind of like a slide rule thing. You can start to move around and you'd be like, oh wow, if you do that, that's pretty awesome. You know, jump to the next one and start using the 5/1 of that, and you can have this really cool flavor. And you'll just start to catalog that information. And you'll be like, what other cadences do you have in this key? And you'll start messing with that and see how that works out, kind of situation. And obviously, again, having a vamp is a huge part of it, because you can just sort of sit there, or come up with your own, of course. You can just sit there and basically start to mess around with this stuff to really dig in. Now, if you just have a single bass note, the sky's the limit and you can do an awful lot of stuff. But as soon as you start factoring in a chord, you have to be a little bit more discerning. But again, the third section here is all about essentially pairing up a pair of chords using synergy, right? 5/1, obviously the ultimate synergy. And then using that in contrast with the sort of underlying backing track. In this case, the B minor, not just playing G major and D7 or G major and D major, but instead now borrowing A major from the key of D major, you know, sort of subverting the listener's expectation, and then of course serving up a juicy platter of awesomeness. Next example. All right, no big deal here. Essentially 3 notes per string, essentially localizing from the cage system, the G-type chord, right? I'm doing it on the A and the low E string. I start on the 4th degree, C major, moving up to D major, moving up to E minor, moving up to F sharp diminished. Later on, I bounce down to obviously B minor, A minor, and G major. Now, the idea here is, again, to just use the diatonic scale as the template, but to now start to localize these triad groups, if you will, to just one family. And you can start to climb up and down the fretboard using just that one particular family. I just did it on 2 strings. You could start to expand out, obviously, to include the the D and the G string, right? So all of a sudden it gets exponentially more difficult. So that's really the what you're trying to do is start to, again, use just the triad itself to map out the fretboard. And again, you can think of it as a rhythm idea too. This is like a Def Leppard thing or whatever it is. So you can start to really work on controlling the string noise, muting technique, and of course the articulation of just doing the fingers individually. That's very important. The hand-eye coordination part of that is just, it's top shelf. So get into ideas like this where you start to effectively use one of these chord systems or combinations thereof to build actual ideas, if you will, and then just practice them in sequences. Mint next. into dominant 7 territory. So essentially I do a bunch of dominant 7 stuff. And of course I do some diminished, and there's minor 7 and just minor triads all mixed in there. In this case, the backing track itself is dominant 7 because it's based off the 5th degree now, right? So D7, which is why I'm using this dominant 7 flavor, really taking advantage of it. So the lesson part here and sort of the takeaway for the practice session has to be that when you hear dominant 7, start to shift your mindset over to doing dominant 7 type things, right? Or playing improvisation ideas that complement the dominant 7, of which there are a great many. Right, not just the dominant 7 arpeggio. You got diminished, you have diminished scales, you have like bebop scales. There's just a huge amount of information there. So for right now, obviously just concentrate on playing these dominant 7s as just 3-note triads and factoring them in there. But of course, the second part is at the end, you see me do this minor sequence climbing down in just basically almost one position. That right there is really important. It's sort of like a Frank Gambale thing / Alex Hutchinson. So that's something you should absolutely practice, is this cascading effect of the triad arpeggios layering on top of each other, moving down the fretboard using groups of 3 strings, starting on the high E string, then moving to the B, then moving to the G, and so on and so forth. And then just starting to practice that stuff religiously until you can kind of go down, up, up, down, up, up, down, up, up, down, up, up, like that kind of deal, and just start to transfer between the strings. And the rest should be history, essentially. And once you start doing stuff like that, you'll be absolutely insane in the shred department, because it's just incredibly efficient to play like that. And you can get like this absolutely ridiculous cascade of notes, especially if you add in an extra note or two, using maybe 3 notes per string kind of thing. You'd just be like, what? That's just nuts, right? So definitely something to investigate there. But the point, of course, the big one is syncing up the dominant 7, and then the sequence in and of itself, trying to localize these triad arpeggios so that you can now play them all in one position, just moving up and down vertically like that. Next example. All right, I thought it prudent that we do too with the chord kind of idea. That's just another minor sequence in this case with E minor. And of course, you see me doing, again, the synergy between the 2 chords. So eventually I move to the high 3 strings. And I think I do a D type with a E type. And again, it's based around a cadence. It's not really that relevant what the cadence is or all the rest of that is, because the thing is you're starting to see me use these same principles again and again and again with respect to the chords and the triads. I sort of pair up the big music ideas, like, oh, I need to do a cadence between these 2 chords for this next little bit of the idea. And initially I want to play a whole bunch of the same type of chord, you know, to open up the idea. So I do the E minor in the open position, right? So there's an E minor 9 there. And I do another variant where I have a big stretch there. And of course I do another E minor 9 as a C type chord, just to jam that one in there a second time before moving to the A type chord. So you see what I mean? Like in my mind, I can already see and visualize these chords connecting to each other. And after that, of course, I use the idea of a cadence again. And of course, I'm just practicing it in a different way on different strings now, on the high 3 strings rather than the set below it, which is what I did before. So again, and using, again, the 5-1, there's no point in getting overly fancy. You can just use the same basic ideas to be like, okay, play this chord and then play this chord. And that's really what you want to be doing. is forcing yourself to be like, play this chord and then play this chord because I'm playing in this key and those two chords will work together. And if it does work out, mission accomplished, right? So the chord thing and the arpeggio thing, they go hand in hand. They should be practiced, obviously, but you'd get more with the chord thing if you were actually playing along with music, because chords in that context need groove. But with arpeggios, you can kind of create your own groove and still work on chords. So it's both, but there's a bit of wiggle room there if you do with the arpeggios where you don't need to play with songs all the time. And constantly be swapping in new songs where you're just learning them right off the bat with just those simple triads from the Cage system. That's another video though. Let's get into this last section. All right, Diminished. I was like, we could play a bunch of Diminished triads. I was like, why? That's super boring and we're not going to learn anything. Instead, the lesson here is that when you're playing over a diminished backing track, okay, and it's extended like that, there's a skill involved with making your solo sound melodic. And you have to balance a lot of elements there, like the melodic minor and the harmonic minor and the half whole tone scale, if you will, or the diminished scales, the whole tone scale, then your standard modes and whatnot. So the first step has to be just to get sort of comfortable with the idea of soloing in the diminished. And then you can start to branch out from there using triads, because that gets into a whole nother ball of wax and something that you're really going to have to just sit down on your own and start to just come to terms with. I'm telling you right now, things get weird when you have like just an extended diminished passage and you start trying to play triads over top of it, even when they're diminished. So I'll let you figure the rest out from there. So, but the thing is you can definitely play sort of like scale fragments landing on a note and then building a triad from there. But obviously it makes sense to start to use things like suspended chords instead of just majors, right? And minors, using suspended chords or extended chords like nines to sort of break up those avoid notes, if you will. So there it is. There's not much more to the video. Instead, just take these sort of creative practice exercises and adapt them over to whatever it is that your playing style requires, right? If you have to just take 2 or 3 of the ideas, do that. If it's just one of the ideas, do that. Find the one that you find is most compatible with where you are and what you want to learn, and then start to use that. Is it moving these chords around using the Cage system and the diatonic scale? We did a couple of those using the G types, using the 3 variants on the top 3 strings. Is it going to be some sort of like a combination of dominant 7 or diminished triads moving into minor triads in a sequence? Okay, that's another option, right? Is it going to be a cadence? Are you going to be doing supplemental work where it's more actual rhythm type ideas? It's up to you to decide, but pick 1 or 2 of those ideas and start to factor them in, and then really think about what it is that you're doing. Don't just go on autopilot and be like, oh yeah, no, I'm playing A and D here. How does that work in relation to the chord I'm playing, B minor, if that's in the key of G major, and sort of like try to draw and connect all the dots? And you're like, okay, I see this fundamental relationship between G major and D major, because D is the 5 and so on and so forth. And then A over here is the 5 of D and so on. It's also the 2 chord of G and blah, blah, blah. And all these things basically start connecting together. So there's a deep relationship between those 2 scales. And then you're like, oh, okay, I got it figured out now. That's why we can start using and borrowing chords from this sympathetic scale system. And there you are. And of course, last but not least is just get comfortable by playing over extended periods of diminished. At first, you'll be like, ooh, not my thing. But trust me, it's just a dragon you have to slay. And then start to try to find ways of being melodic. And then, of course, last but not least, reach for the brass ring, which is going to be starting to go outside using the melodic minor and the harmonic minor and superimposition for that matter. So I wish you all the best of luck. Thanks for hanging. I appreciate every single one of you. We'll see you in the next one.